I, 52M, got married to my wife, 50F, 2 years ago after dating for 3 years. My wife has a son, Joe, 21M, from her previous marriage, and he recently graduated with a business degree. Joe and I get along well, but it's not like we're the best of friends, and neither do we share a father-son relationship. My wife's ex-husband is still a part of his life and they meet pretty often, so it's not like he's missing out on anything either. Now the problem is that my wife had promised her son that he could take over my business once he graduated from college. I have a moderately successful catering business of my own that I inherited from my father when he passed away. I've been running it for almost 20 years now, not counting the years that I have been running it alongside my father before inheriting it, and I have no intention of giving it up. Not until I retire, at least, and there's still a lot of time to go until then. I really don't know why my wife thought it would be a good idea to promise Joe that he could take over the business without even consulting with me first. Last week, we attended his graduation party and he took us out for dinner a little later in the evening, and that's where this came up. While we were having dessert, Joe started talking about how he wouldn't have to go looking for internships or jobs, unlike his other friends from college, since he already had a plan in mind, and then he smiled at me. I was obviously lost, but I still smiled back and looked towards my wife so she could explain what was going on. She said nothing at the time, and we finished dinner then left to go back home because Joe was going to spend the night with his friends in their apartment. On the drive back home, I decided to ask my wife what Joe had been talking about when he said that he already had a plan in mind. That's when she confessed to me that she'd kind of promised Joe before he left for college that I was going to let him take over my business when he graduated. I was a little shocked and told her that she needed to inform him that that was not going to happen because obviously, he was still very young and inexperienced, so I was not going to hand over the reins to him so soon, or maybe never at all, because there were far more capable and deserving employees of mine who could run the business. My wife began to argue with me in the car and told me that I was being silly, that she trusted Joe and knew that he would do a good job if I just let him try once. I argued back and told her that there was no trying when it came to my business that my dad had started and given to me to take care of and grow. He could either handle it or he couldn't. And in my opinion, right now, he was not ready for it. He was fresh out of college and kids his age needed practice because they were just not mentally ready to take on the pressure. So he needed to intern somewhere, and if he did a good job then maybe I would let him work under me, but he still had a long way to go before I trusted him to take over my business altogether. When I said this to my wife, she completely freaked out at me and started accusing me of being selfish and not thinking about Joe and his financial well-being. She told me that I was not acting like a father at all and I was being really self-involved. To which I said that it was true because I actually was not Joe's father, so I really didn't need to act like a father figure to him. At that point, she got really upset and she made me pull over, and then she climbed down from the car and walked all the way home. But it was fine because we were just a couple of blocks away from our house anyway. I didn't go home right away and instead hit the bar because I was also very upset about this fight with my wife. I thought that she was being unreasonable, and I still think so. I came back home around midnight and by then my wife had already fallen asleep, so we didn't get a chance to discuss it that day. When we woke up the next morning, she pretended that everything was fine, so I didn't bring up the argument from the previous night either. But 2 days later, when Joe called me to ask about the business, I told him point blank that his mother hadn't discussed the idea with me first, and if she'd bothered to do that then she would have known that I was not going to hand over the business to him. So he needed to find a job like all his other friends because whatever his mother had said was not happening anymore. He thought I was kidding at first, so I really had to force him to believe that I really wasn't going to let him take over. Now that I think of it, there had been a lot of instances over the last couple of years where he had hinted at taking over the business, but I had always laughed it off because I thought he must be joking. Had I known about the promise that my wife had made to her son, then I would have addressed those jokes and nipped this in the bud. After I told him that I was not letting him take over, he flipped out on me and yelled at me for making false promises and being selfish, just like his mother had, and then disconnected the call before I could even defend myself. I was at work at the time, so I didn't tell my wife anything since I was still busy and figured that I would talk to her once I got home. When I did get home, my wife was furious and she didn't even wait for me to take off my coat before she started screaming at me. She told me that apparently Joe had called her right after the phone call with me and had tore into her for lying to him and leading him to believe that he would be allowed to take over my business once he graduated. And she told me that this was all my fault because now Joe was cutting us all out of his life since he didn't trust us anymore. I told her that none of this was my fault because I wasn't the one who'd told her son that he would be allowed to take over my business. I didn't make any promises to him, and neither did I make any promises to her that I didn't live up to. She had lied to her son for years, and now, whatever Joe had decided was good for him. Because had my mother lied to me the way she had, then I probably wouldn't have wanted to speak to her either. She got so mad that she just stormed out of the house while sobbing and told me that she was going to live with her sister for a while. I didn't try to stop her either because I was in a really bad mood after that argument, as I honestly didn't see how this was my fault. She left that day and it's been 3 days since then and she hasn't come back. We haven't even been able to talk to each other because I haven't called her and neither has she tried to call me, so it's just been radio silence on both ends. Yesterday, I thought she'd called me, but instead, It turned out to be her older sister who rang me just to berate me for the way I had been behaving. She told me that my wife had been miserable ever since she left the house and hadn't stopped crying for even 1 second because now she felt like she was losing not only her son but also her husband. I'll admit, that made me feel terrible about myself because the last thing that I wanted to do was make my wife cry. Her sister also told me that the only reason my wife had lied to her son about allowing him to take over the business was because her son was actually planning not to go to college in the first place. Apparently, Joe had been telling his mother that he actually wanted to join a band and see how that worked out for him, but my wife wanted him to go to college and get a degree first. The only way that she could think of was to give him the incentive of having a ready-made business to take over once he graduated. She didn't discuss it with me first because she knew that I was going to say no, but she believed that once he graduated, I would change my mind and see what a responsible young man he had turned into. She had also intended to discuss it with me at least once over the years, but she just failed to do so because she felt shy to ask me about it since it wasn't her place to talk about the business and Joe wasn't my son. I told her sister that I understood where my wife was coming from and I realized that she was just very concerned about her son's future. But that was still no excuse to lie to both her son and also me, in a way. Her sister told me that it wasn't her place to interfere in our marriage either, but she just wanted me to know that my wife was willing to work on our marriage as long as I apologized to her for being so hard on her and Joe. After saying that, she disconnected the call while I struggled to make up my mind on what to do. On one hand, I really wanted to reconcile with my wife and make things right, but on the other hand, I didn't think that this was my fault. So I don't understand why she wanted me to apologize when it was actually she who should be apologizing to me. It's been one whole day since the phone call and I still haven't been able to make up my mind on what to do. Ida for telling my stepson that I was not going to let him take over my business after my wife had promised him without asking me first. Update 1. So, I decided not to apologize to my wife. After I read the comments here, I realized that I really wasn't in the wrong. If my wife wanted to convince her son to attend college, then there were several more clever and effective ways than just straight up lying to him about something that even she knew was not going to be possible. And even after that, she still had the chance to fix it by talking to me at least once, but she didn't even do that and decided to spring it on me after he had already graduated. So now, if she wants to make this marriage work, she is going to have to be the one who sucks it up and apologizes to me. It's been close to a week since she left and there's still no word from her. I have no idea what's going on in her head and what she plans to do in the future, but one thing's for sure, I am not going back to her begging for forgiveness like all the other times. She is the one who created this mess, so she's going to have to be the one who cleans it up. But, thank you, guys, for all the advice and help. It actually helped me clear my head a little because she always does this. She screws up and then I'm always the one who has to go running after her, just so that we can be together. Well, that might have worked for her before, but this time, I am putting my foot down. I cannot constantly be the one chasing after her and putting all the effort into making our marriage work. Update 2. It's been almost 2 weeks since my wife left and we haven't been talking. I almost contacted a lawyer today because I didn't think she would come back anytime soon. But, thankfully, she came back today at noon. She hasn't said much to me yet, but she has said that she's sorry for the way she behaved. That's good enough for me for now. I don't know what's going to happen with her and her son, though. If we are to go by her how sad she seems, I don't think that she's fixed her fight with her son yet. To be honest, I don't even think I can call it a fight per se, because what really happened was that she lied to her son, and now that the truth has come out, he's refusing to speak to her. I hate to be the one to say it, but I really don't think that he did anything wrong here. She has apologized to me, but like I said, she's still very upset and isn't talking to me like she used to before. It's been very quiet around the house even though she is back. Joe has blocked me. I don't know if he has blocked his mother as well, but if he has, then that would explain why she is acting this way. Since she can't even reach out to him right now, even to apologize to him. If she talks to me or asks me for advice, then I'll probably tell her to try and contact some of his friends to pass a message on to him. It'll be kind of embarrassing for him, but at least she'll have a way to speak to him. I don't even know what his father has to say about any of this because my wife hasn't talked to me about any of this yet. I am kind of curious to know what everybody else thinks of her plan to get Joe to attend college. I mean, it succeeded. Joe did complete college and graduated, but now he's not even talking to her, so I would say it kind of backfired. It's really saddening because I know how much she loves her son and how it was so important for her that her son goes to college. But now it's just all a total mess and she has nobody but herself to blame. Update 3. It's been 2 days since my wife came back to me and she'd been really weird and quiet the past 2 days, but today, we finally had a talk about everything that had happened since the graduation. Once again, she told me that she was sorry for talking to Joe without even asking me first if I was okay with that promise. I said that it was okay and thought that would be it, but instead, she just started crying and had a total breakdown while we were talking, and I was quite taken aback. As soon as she started crying, I hugged her and tried to comfort her, but there was just no consoling her. She went on crying and serving for almost an hour, and she kept mumbling about how she was so sorry for disappointing everybody in her family and that she wished she was a better wife or a better mother, but unfortunately, she'd failed at both. It was concerning how badly she had broken down, and I felt awful for not checking up on her when she was at her sister's house because clearly, she had been going through a lot. I know it was her own fault, but she still is my wife and I should have tried to at least make things better. After almost an hour, when she finally stopped crying, I asked her if there was anything that I could do to make her feel better. She told me that she really just only wanted to talk to Joe right now to make things okay with him, but just as I had suspected, he had blocked her from everywhere. And she didn't have any phone numbers of his friends to get to him. She tried to contact him through his father, her ex-husband, but even he had said that Joe did not want to speak to her and had told her that he was not going to help her out here because she was the one at fault, so she had to figure out her own way to make amends with him. So I told her that I would find a way for her to contact Joe and get to work almost immediately. I did some stalking on social media and found out who were close friends of Joe's. I remembered this one kid who seemed to be really close with him, and I found his account somehow. Once I found him, I sent out a message to him and hoped that he would see it and put us in touch with Joe. We explained everything that had happened and I just pleaded with the guy to make a phone call and put us in touch with Joe. 1 hour later, my wife received a call from a number that she didn't recognize and we were positive that it was Joe's friend calling. We answered the call and thankfully, it was Joe on the other line. I didn't hear the entire conversation, but I could hear my wife's end. She was apologizing profusely and I almost felt bad for her because I knew how much she loved Joe. They went on arguing for a while and my wife explained why she had done what she had done and told him that he would really appreciate that he had a college degree later on in life. And then she went on to say that if it was the only way to make him go to college, then she would do it again, and she started getting aggravated after a while. I could tell that the conversation was not going the way that my wife had planned because she was getting all red in the face again and her neck was getting blotchy, so I tried to tell her to hang up and that she could have this discussion later. But they continued talking and soon enough, it turned into a full-blown shouting match where I could also hear Joe yelling at his mother and my wife dishing it out just as rudely. I'd never heard my wife speaking to another person this way, so this was a surprise, especially because the person she was speaking to was her own son. She called him a lot of horrible things and then she ended the call by saying that he was exactly like his father. After she ended the call, she was pretty hysterical and just ranted about how disgusted she was by her son for the next 15 minutes and I let her, because she needed it to get all that negativity out. After she calmed down, I asked her what exactly had happened and she told me that on the call, Joe had accused her of lying, which she said was true, and apologized to him for that. But then he told her that she was a terrible mother and that she had apparently ruined his life by forcing him to waste his years at college when he could have just as well joined the band and made a future for himself as a musician. He told her that she had ruined his dream and that he never wanted to speak to her again because she was one of the most selfish and heartless people he knew. That is really when my wife snapped because everything she had done up until this point was for the betterment of her son's life. She knew that he would never be able to make it big as a musician because, as harsh as it sounds, he was just never very good at it and he was always kind of tone deaf. And even most of the people that he had been in the band with in high school were now pursuing other things in life, but he was the only fool still chasing after that dream. This is the exact same thing that happened with her ex-husband, where she had told him that she didn't want him to start a new business, especially when the one he'd started before was still failing, and he'd accused her of being unsupportive, which had eventually led to a lot of fights and problems in their marriage which ended in divorce. That's what she meant when she told Joe that he was exactly like his father. She told me that she had always tried to look out for her son's best interests and tried to stop him from making bad decisions that would affect his future, but now, she knew there was just no point in trying anymore. Because he clearly was so oblivious that he didn't even know what was good for him and what wasn't. She told me that if her son now wanted to make her the villain in his life, she was cool with it and she wasn't going to try making things better anymore. She was sick of being blamed for every single thing that went wrong in his life or her ex-husband's life. So it was an emotionally heavy day for my wife, but I'm glad that she at least tried to sort things out, even if it went south eventually. She made a mistake and then she tried to correct it, but if they can't see that, then well, that's on them. She's calmed down considerably since then and we had a peaceful dinner. She didn't bring up anything about Joe or her ex-husband after she had her meltdown. She's asleep right now and I'm really hopeful that by tomorrow, she'll be feeling better about all of this. Update 4. Hi, everybody. So it's been almost a week since my wife stopped talking to her son, and today she received a call from her ex-husband, saying that Joe wanted to talk to her and she needed to visit them at his house. She needed to come by herself because this was a family thing and I wasn't part of the family, so they wanted me to stay out of it. But my wife was very firm and she told them that she could either go to his house with me or she wouldn't be coming at all because she didn't want to deal with their nonsense on her own. So eventually, they agreed to let me come, but they told me that I had to stay out of whatever discussion that they were going to have. Which wasn't going to be a problem for me because I wasn't really interested in talking to either her ex-husband or Joe. When we got there, it looked like all of them were ready to drag her to court or something because they had these serious looks on their faces, and I think they were probably trying to intimidate my wife, but lucky for her that doesn't work on her. Once we were sitting in the living room, Joe wasted no time and told her that because she had forced him to go to college and waste 3 years of his life doing something that he had no interest in, it was time for her to stick to her promise and make me let him take over my business. Now I know that I'd said I wasn't going to interfere, but as soon as he said that, I interjected and asked him if he was crazy because that was obviously never going to happen. Not now, not ever. Not even if he was ready because, at this point, I just didn't like the guy. He wasn't my son and I owed him nothing, so I told him so right to his face. And his father then told me that I wasn't part of this discussion, so I need to just shut the hell up. That really rubbed me the wrong way because this was my catering business that they were talking about, so of course I had to be part of the discussion. I argued with my wife's ex-husband for a little bit, but my wife made me stop because it wasn't worth it and I knew that, so I just fixed him with a dirty look and then kept quiet. Joe continued to insist that my wife talk to me and let him take over the business soon or else he really would cut her off. I expected my wife to hesitate a little, but she didn't, and I was really proud of her. She told Joe that she was doing nothing of the sort and that if he didn't want to be thankful that she helped him out in securing a future for himself, then that was fine with her. But he couldn't make any demands like these. She apologized for lying to him, but that was it, and she told him that she didn't owe him any more apologies for anything else because, at the end of the day, she was just trying to look out for him, and if he couldn't appreciate that, then she really would prefer for him to cut her off. Her ex-husband told her that he was going to take her to court if she didn't live up to the promise that she'd made, and she laughed right in his face and asked him if he even knew any attorney who would fight his case for him, knowing that they didn't even have a contract or any agreement to show for the promise that she had made. He got really flustered and told her that he wanted her out of his house right now, and we obliged. Even as we were about to get into our car and drive back home, Joe made sure that he screamed at his mother and told her how awful she was. But we chose to ignore it and just got back home as fast as we could because we didn't want to waste any more time on them. We're home now and we hope that this situation with her son has blown over, so we won't have to meet them again, because today was a huge waste of our time and energy.